There's a sequence that has destroyed every major empire in recorded history. Not war, not disease, not natural disaster. A predictable 7-stage collapse that plays out the exact same way every single time. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The Roman Empire, which dominated the known world for 5 centuries, followed all 7 stages before it fell. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, collapsed through the same sequence. The Ottoman Empire, which lasted 600 years, followed the pattern stage by stage. The British Empire, which controlled a quarter of the Earth's population, went through all 7 stages and lost everything within 30 years. 4 empires, 4 continents, 4 different centuries, but the exact same 7 stages. Not similar, identical. Because the pattern isn't about culture or geography or technology, it's about human nature and mathematics. And both are unchangeable. Right now, in 2025, the United States is in stage 5, accelerating toward stage 6. And history says what comes next is inevitable. This is the story of the 7 stages that destroy empires. How they destroyed Rome, the Mongols, the Ottomans, and Britain. And why every warning sign says America is following the exact same path. Let's start with stage 1, dominance. Every empire begins here. Military superiority, economic power, technological advancement, and most importantly, a currency that the world trusts. Rome in 100 AD controlled 60 million people across 3 continents. Its military was unmatched. The denarius, a pure silver coin, was accepted from Britain to Egypt. When you held a denarius, you held real value. Pure silver, universal trust. The Mongol Empire in 1279, under Kublai Khan, stretched from Korea to Hungary, the largest empire ever created. They controlled the Silk Road, the trade routes that connected east and west. They introduced paper currency backed by silk and silver. Merchants across Asia accepted Mongol currency because the empire guaranteed its value. The Ottoman Empire in 1550 controlled 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. The akçe, their silver coin, was the standard currency across the Mediterranean and Middle East. The Ottoman treasury was flush with silver from Balkan mines. The empire seemed unstoppable. Britain in 1900 governed 458 million people, 1/4 of humanity. The British pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. Over 60% of global trade was conducted in pounds. The gold standard backed everything. 1 pound could be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold. This created trust that lasted generations. The United States, after World War II, undisputed military superiority, half of global manufacturing. The dollar became the world's reserve currency in 1944 at Bretton Woods. Backed by gold at $35 per ounce, the dollar was as good as gold, literally. America was invincible. That's stage 1. Peak power, universal currency. The empire seems immortal, but dominance creates the conditions for stage 2. Stage 2? Overextension. Success breeds expansion, and expansion is expensive. Rome in the 2nd century AD pushed its borders to their maximum extent. From Scotland to the Sahara, from Portugal to Persia. Every new territory required legions to defend it, forts to build, roads to maintain, governors to pay. The costs grew exponentially while revenue grew linearly. The Mongol Empire faced the same problem. Kublai Khan launched 2 failed invasions of Japan. The costs were astronomical. Hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, decades of planning. Both invasions failed completely. Meanwhile, maintaining control over territories stretching 9,000 miles required constant military presence. The Mongols were spread impossibly thin. The Ottoman Empire overextended in Europe. Suleiman the Magnificent pushed into Hungary and laid siege to Vienna in 1529. The empire was now fighting wars on multiple fronts simultaneously. Against the Persians in the east, against the Europeans in the west, against rebels in the colonies. The military budget consumed everything. Britain's overextension was global. By 1914, the British Empire had military commitments on every continent. India required 70,000 British troops permanently. Africa required constant military expeditions. The Royal Navy had to patrol every ocean. Then came World War I. Britain mobilized 8.9 million soldiers. The costs were beyond anything the empire had ever faced. The United States today maintains nearly 800 military bases in over 70 countries. The defense budget exceeds $800 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. And wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost over $8 trillion. Military commitments in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. The empire is everywhere, and everywhere is expensive. That's stage 2. The empire expands beyond its means. Military costs become unsustainable, which forces stage 3. Stage 3, deficit spending. The empire spends more than it earns. At first, this seems manageable. They borrow against future revenue. They issue bonds. They promise to repay. But the deficits become structural, permanent. Rome in the 3rd century AD was running permanent budget deficits. Military salaries, infrastructure, administration, the costs never stopped. Tax revenue couldn't keep pace. The treasury was empty, but the spending continued. The Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan ran massive deficits. The Ottoman Empire borrowed heavily from European banks. By the 1800s, Ottoman debt had spiraled out of control. In 1875, the empire declared bankruptcy and defaulted on half its debt. The foreign creditors demanded control of Ottoman finances as collateral. The empire was now borrowing just to pay interest on previous loans. Britain entered World War I with manageable debt. By 1919, Britain's national debt had increased tenfold, from $650 million to over $7 billion in just 5 years. The empire borrowed from everyone, its own citizens, the United States, anyone who would lend. By World War II, the debt reached 270% of GDP. The empire had spent itself into a hole it could never climb out of. The United States ran its first trillion-dollar deficit in 2009. It hasn't stopped since. Total national debt in 1980 was $900 billion. By 2000, $5.6 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. Today, in 2025, it's over $36 trillion. That's a 40-fold increase in 45 years, and it's accelerating. The government now spends $1.7 trillion more than it collects annually, even during economic growth. That's stage 3, permanent deficits. Borrowing becomes the only way to function, which leads directly to stage 4. Stage 4, currency debasement. The empire can't borrow enough, can't tax enough. So they debase the currency. They print money. Rome started with the denarius at 100% pure silver. Emperor Nero reduced it to 90%, still substantial. But his successors kept going. By 211 AD, it was 50% silver. By 265 AD, just 5% silver. A coin that was once pure silver was now 95% worthless metal with a thin silver coating. Think about what that means. A Roman soldier in 265 AD was being paid in coins worth 1/20th of what soldiers earned 2 centuries earlier. The government told them nothing had changed. The coins still said denarius, but the purchasing power had collapsed. Kublai Khan printed paper currency with nothing backing it. At first, he maintained this fiction that silver and silk backed every note, but he printed far more notes than he had assets. By the late 1200s, Mongol currency was essentially worthless. Merchants refused to accept it. The economy seized up. The Ottoman Empire debased the akçe repeatedly. In 1475, the akçe contained 1.15 grams of silver. By 1640, just 0.05 grams. The silver content had been reduced by 95%. The currency became a joke. Foreign traders demanded payment in European coins instead. Britain abandoned the gold standard in 1914 to print money for World War I. They tried to return to gold in 1925, but it was unsustainable. By 1931, Britain permanently left gold. The pound became a fiat currency, backed by nothing but the government's promise. Then came the devaluations. 30% devaluation in 1949, another devaluation in 1967. Each one destroyed savings and crushed confidence. The United States left gold in 1971. President Nixon closed the gold window. No more gold backing. The dollar became pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but trust. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars from nothing. Quantitative easing, they called it. During COVID, they printed over $4 trillion in 2 years. More money created than in the previous century combined. That's stage 4. The currency is debased. Real value is destroyed, which causes stage 5. Stage 5, inflation. More currency chasing the same amount of goods means prices explode. Rome saw prices increase 50-fold between 200 AD and 300 AD. What cost 1 denarius now cost 50. Farmers stopped selling food for coins. They demanded barter instead. Gold, goods, land, anything but debased currency. The Mongol Empire experienced hyperinflation. Prices in yuan China increased by 1,000% within decades. The paper currency became worthless. The economy collapsed into barter. Trade along the Silk Road dried up because no one trusted Mongol money anymore. The Ottoman Empire saw constant price inflation throughout the 1600s and 1700s. Food prices quadrupled. Wages couldn't keep pace. Revolts broke out across the empire as people starved while the currency became worthless. Britain in the 1970s experienced 25% annual inflation. Wages, savings, pensions, all destroyed. The government had to go begging to the IMF for a bailout. The pound, which had once been the world's reserve currency, was now a symbol of national humiliation. The United States hit 9% inflation in 2022, official numbers. Real inflation, the prices you actually pay for food, housing, healthcare, is far higher. The purchasing power of the dollar has collapsed. What $100 bought in 2000 requires $180 today. And it's accelerating. The debasement is catching up. That's stage 5. Inflation destroys purchasing power. And when people realize that their currency is being destroyed, stage 6 begins. Stage 6, loss of confidence. The population and foreign nations lose trust. Roman soldiers in the 4th century refused payment in denarii. They demanded gold or goods. Tax collectors couldn't collect taxes because no one would accept the currency. The economic system collapsed. The Mongol Empire lost legitimacy when its currency failed. Kublai Khan's successors couldn't collect taxes, couldn't pay armies. Regional governors declared independence because the central government had no functional currency. The empire fragmented. The Ottoman Empire lost credibility after defaulting in 1875. Foreign banks refused to lend. Trade partners demanded payment in gold. The empire became the sick man of Europe. Within decades, it was gone. Britain lost reserve currency status at Bretton Woods in 1944. The world shifted from pounds to dollars. Britain fought desperately to maintain the pound status, but it was over. The empire dissolved within 30 years. The United States is losing reserve currency status right now. In 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, 58% and falling. The BRICS nations are building alternatives. China and Russia trade in local currencies. Central banks worldwide are buying gold aggressively. The world is preparing for the dollar to lose dominance. That's stage 6. Trust evaporates. And when confidence is gone, stage 7 is inevitable. Stage 7, collapse. The economic system fails. The currency becomes worthless or loses its dominance. The empire can't fund its military, can't maintain control, can't hold the territories. Rome fell to Germanic tribes it had defeated for centuries. Not because the tribes got stronger, because Rome couldn't pay its armies anymore. The Mongol Empire fragmented into separate khanats by 1368. The Yuan dynasty in China collapsed completely. The empire that once stretched across Asia dissolved within a century of currency failure. The Ottoman Empire officially ended in 1922 after World War I, but the collapse began decades earlier when the currency and economy failed. The military defeats were symptoms, not causes. Britain lost its empire between 1945 and 1975. India in 1947. Egypt in 1956. Colony after colony broke away, not through conquest. Britain simply couldn't afford to maintain them anymore. And America? That's the question we're living through right now. 7 stages, repeated 4 times across 700 years. Different empires, different continents, different currencies, but the exact same sequence. Because the math doesn't change. You cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print prosperity. And you cannot debase your currency without consequences. The pattern is absolute. The United States is in stage 5, heading toward stage 6. The debt cannot be repaid. The spending cannot stop. The money printing continues. And history, which has watched this sequence destroy 4 empires before, says the ending is inevitable. The only questions left are timing and severity. How long until stage 6? How long until the world loses confidence in the dollar? How long until the American empire follows Rome, the Mongols, the Ottomans, and Britain into the history books? The pattern says we're close. The numbers say we're close. And history never lies. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. Because when the pattern completes, you'll want to understand what happened and why. The 7 stages don't change, and they're coming.